That old woman should be sent to a nursing home. This house will be ours. Let's start by tricking her into signing the will.
That old woman should be sent to a nursing home. This house will be ours. Let's start by tricking her into signing the will. The voices of Melissa, my daughter-in-law, and my son. A conversation between the two people I love most in this world, and in a single moment, all those years of love and sacrifice turned into a blade, sharp cold, and buried deep into my heart. Hearing those words, my heart stopped for a beat.
Hearing
That
those
old
words,
woman,
my
not
heart
Mom.
stopped.
Not the woman who raised them from their first steps, who paid for her son's education so he could have a future, who handed down her wedding ring to her daughter-in-law with all her trust, believing she would find comfort in her family in her final years. But in the end, all that remained were two words: that old woman. I stood in the house I'd lived in for more than 40 years, the place where I'd planted every flower with my own hands, where laughter used to fill every morning, and suddenly I felt like a stranger in my own life. But they forgot one thing. I may be old, my hands may tremble, my skin may wrinkle, but I am not weak. I've survived storms for more than half a lifetime, not to end up being treated as a burden. Thank you for being here, listening to my story. If you're still listening, drop a heart and tell me where you're tuning in from. Stories about dignity, justice, and the strength of age deserve to be heard everywhere. My name is Victoria Hayes, 65 years old, a dark-skinned American woman living in Savannah, Georgia. I've worked my whole life building everything from nothing: a small company, a riverside home, and one son, Daniel, my greatest pride. I used to think I had it all: peace, family, and love. When Daniel married Melissa, I cried tears of joy. She was smart, charming, and well-spoken. I believed at last my son had found a woman warm enough to love him as I always had. In the early years of their marriage, everything was perfect. Melissa would cook with me on weekends, calling me Mom in her sweet voice. I trusted her completely. So much that I even handed her the house papers for safekeeping, thinking I'd found the daughter I never had. But then came that one voicemail. One cold, deliberate sentence, and everything collapsed. I played it again. Melissa's voice was calm, steady, not a hint of hesitation. Daniel, once she's in the nursing home, this house will be ours. Things will be much simpler then. She, that single word cut through me like a blade. She, not Mom, not the woman who paid her college tuition, not the woman who gave her the silver wedding ring once worn by my husband so they could start their new life. I sank into the chair, my hands trembling as I held the phone. My eyes stared into the empty air, watching the sunlight spill through the window, glinting off the droplets on the floor. Harsh, raw light that exposed a truth I wasn't ready to face. How long had Melissa thought this way? When did this house, the one my husband and I painted together, the one with the marigolds we planted by the porch, become the target of the woman I called family? I wanted to believe I'd misheard. I wanted to believe there was another explanation, but my heart knew the truth there was none. The words were too clear, too cruel. I tried to breathe, but my chest felt tight. A chill ran down my spine. Then, in the recording, a faint laugh. Daniel's. Short, uncertain, but it was agreement. Just a laugh, and yet it shattered me. The room around me turned unfamiliar. Everything, every object seemed to take the shape of betrayal. The wedding photo on the shelf, the one I framed myself, now mocked me with their smiling faces. I forced myself to stand, leaning against the table, breathing hard. "No, Victoria," I whispered. "Not now. Not yet." I looked down at the shattered glass at my feet, fragments reflecting my face, my eyes burning with fury. "They can take my property," I murmured, "but they will never take the soul of a mother." Outside the savannah, sunset painted the river in red. The light crept through the window, falling on my face, the face of a woman who had lost everything, yet still held the most precious thing of all, willpower. In that moment, I knew I would not fall. Not yet. Not while justice remained silent. Not while my blood still boiled with the sting of betrayal. I picked up the phone again, its blue light still blinking. And in the silence of the house that was falling apart, I swore I would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. I still remember the scent of that first morning after my husband passed away. The bitter smell of old coffee, the faint trace of burned paper, and the bank documents scattered across the table. I stood in our empty house, once filled with laughter, now silent, except for the ticking of the clock. Daniel was only 10 then. I held his small hand and promised I would give him a good life, even though I had no idea how I would make it through the next day. I worked 2 jobs arranging flowers at a friend's shop by day and cleaning rooms at a riverside hotel by night. In the early mornings, when Savannah was still covered in fog, I packed Daniel a sandwich and told him to eat slowly to have strength for school. I still remember his eyes bright with innocence and trust. "Don't worry, Mom," he said. "I'll be good. I'll make you proud one day." I lived for that promise. I believed that if I loved deeply enough, worked hard enough, my son would grow up happy. I didn't need anyone else, just Daniel, until Melissa came into his life. I met her for the first time at Daniel's birthday party at the office. She was young, beautiful, confident, and radiant. I saw the way my son looked at her, the kind of look only love can bring. When she called me Mom for the first time, I almost cried. "My daughter," I said, "I've always wished for someone to care for Daniel when I'm no longer here." Their wedding day was filled with sunlight. I sat in the front row wearing a pale pink dress, holding a bouquet of chrysanthemums, my late husband's favorite flowers. As I watched them exchange rings, pride filled my heart. "My son finally has a family," I whispered to a friend beside me. In the beginning, Melissa was kind and attentive. She helped me rearrange the garden, came over for dinner, always bringing a delicate dessert. She had a way of making me feel appreciated. When Daniel was busy, she would call just to chat, to ask how I was doing. I thought to myself, at last I have another daughter. But some things don't collapse overnight. They crack silently, so faintly that you don't notice until one day you realize you're standing in the ruins. Melissa's changes started small. She began suggesting how I should organize things. "Mom, it's hard to find stuff like this. Let me fix it for you." I smiled, thinking she meant well. But slowly, those suggestions turned into decisions. "You should sell that old car. It's not safe. This house is too big for you, Mom. Don't you feel lonely?" Daniel noticed at first, but trusted his wife completely. And I trusted my son. That trust became a noose tightening around me, keeping me from seeing how much control I had already lost. One afternoon, I found out Melissa had paid the housekeeper from my bank account. She said I was just helping Mom. You forget things sometimes. I didn't question her. I thought it was her way of showing care. But there was something in her eyes, cold, distant, every time the word house came up. The home I once found peace in began to suffocate me. I no longer felt free to open my cupboards or walk into my kitchen. It all felt like it belonged to them now, not to me. I sat alone in the living room, the soft yellow light shining on an old family photo. In it, Daniel was still a little boy in his school uniform, smiling brightly. I reached out, tracing his face with my fingers, and felt a sting deep inside. When family becomes a knife, I thought, you never know whether to hold it or to let it go. I still wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, but something in Melissa's eyes told me otherwise. It wasn't the gaze of a daughter. It was the look of someone waiting for her prey to weaken. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind outside whispered through the window, reminding me that sometimes the ones we love the most are the ones who hurt us deepest. And I could feel it. Something dark was approaching, slow but certain. Time passed, and my house still stood quietly by the Savannah River, but something inside it had changed. Everything carried Melissa's touch. The beige curtains, the new rug in the living room. She said it was all to make things more modern, more comfortable, so you can feel relaxed, Mom. I smiled, nodded, tried to believe she meant well. But with every change she made, another piece of my memory disappeared. One May afternoon, while I was making tea, Melissa stepped into the kitchen, her voice soft as silk. "Mom, have you ever thought about selling this house?" I looked up, startled. "Sell it? Why?" She smiled, placing a gentle hand on mine. "You live alone, Mom. This house is too big, too much work to maintain. If you sold it, you could move into a smaller place, something convenient, closer to town. Daniel and I will help you with everything." Her tone was sweet, but something cold ran through me. I shook my head. "This house, it's where your father and I built our life. I'm not going anywhere." Melissa paused, still smiling, though her eyes told a different story. "Of course, Mom. I just want what's best for you." After that, I started paying attention. The small calls, the moments Melissa went into my study when I wasn't home, the papers she handed me to sign quickly, saying they were just minor procedures. I didn't question her. Not until one day, while looking for old insurance files, I found a thin folder tucked in the bottom drawer, the one where I always kept my most important documents. The first page made my heart stop. It was a deed transfer, the ownership of the house reassigned to Daniel and Melissa Hayes. At the bottom, a signature, my name, Victoria Hayes, curved perfectly confidently, but it wasn't my handwriting. I stared at it for what felt like hours, my pulse pounding in my ears. I pulled out the rest of the papers. Copies, stamps, notarizations, every one of them bore my signature. Perfect forgeries. When Melissa came home, I was waiting in the living room, the documents in my hand. "Explain this," I said, my voice trembling from rage more than fear. She froze for a split second, then her expression softened into that polished calm I now knew too well. "Mom, you forgot. I did it with your permission. You said you wanted to transfer part of the property to me and Daniel to make future paperwork easier." I felt the air leave my lungs. "You're lying," I whispered. "I never said that." Melissa tilted her head, smiling as if talking to a child. "Mom, you're getting older. Your memory isn't what it used to be. I understand, but please don't get upset." I looked into her eyes, searching for a hint of guilt, some sign of shame, but all I saw was cold confidence. Then Daniel walked in. "What's going on here?" he asked. I turned to him, thrusting the papers forward. "Look at this, Daniel. They forged my signature." He glanced at the documents, then at Melissa. She reached for his hand, her voice syrupy soft. "I only did what your mom wanted. You know how she forgets things sometimes." Daniel frowned, his eyes flicking between us. "Mom, maybe you agreed and forgot. Melissa's just trying to help." My chest ached. "You really believe her, Daniel?" He looked away. "You're tired, Mom. Get some rest." When they left, silence swallowed the room. I stared at the papers on the table, my hands trembling, nails biting into my palms. "Tired," I muttered. No, Daniel, I'm not tired. I'm finally awake. That night, I spread every document across the table. Each page was a wound, each forged signature a cut deep into my trust. I'd been too kind, too blind. In the dim light, my eyes fell on an old note written by my late husband, folded neatly between papers, his handwriting steady and certain. Trust does not mean blindness. I folded it back and pressed it to my chest. If this is the path they've chosen, I whispered, then from this day on, I won't be the forgiving mother anymore. The doubt inside me had taken root, and I knew this was only the beginning. The afternoon rain came suddenly heavy and relentless. I sat alone in my study, surrounded by piles of old files coated in dust, papers I'd been digging through for days. They were Richard's, my late husband's tax records, contracts, receipts. He had been a meticulous man, careful with every document, every number. I thought if there was anything that could help me understand how Melissa forged those papers, it had to be buried somewhere here. The dim desk lamp cast light over a yellowed envelope at the bottom of the pile. On the corner, written hastily in Richard's familiar handwriting, were the words Samuel Reed, Bureau File. My heart skipped. I pulled it closer. Inside were a few aged papers with Richard's handwritten note, Special Investigator, Financial Audit Assistance, 2002. At the bottom was a faded phone number, barely legible. Samuel Reed. I whispered the name into the silence. Perhaps he had worked with Richard years ago during that old insurance investigation. A thought crossed my mind. If he was still alive, maybe he could help me uncover what Melissa had done. I sat down, picked up my phone, and dialed the number. A few seconds later, a low, rough male voice answered, slow and steady. "Hello? Sorry to bother you," I began carefully. "My name is Victoria Hayes, wife of Richard Hayes. You worked with my husband a long time ago." There was a pause, followed by a deep breath. "Richard Hayes, I remember. The man with the brown notebook, right?" I smiled faintly. "That's right. You still remember." "Hard to forget," he said. "Richard was one of the few men in finance who didn't let money blind him. Why are you calling me Mrs. Hayes?" I took a breath and told him everything. The voicemail, the forged signatures, the growing suspicion that my daughter-in-law had betrayed me. He listened quietly, occasionally letting out a short, thoughtful hum. When I finished, there was only silence, then a long sigh on the other end. "You said her name is Melissa Hayes?" "Yes." "How old is she?" "About 32. Another pause. Then his voice dropped an octave, calm but cold. "I've heard that name before." My heart skipped. "What do you mean? A few years ago, I worked a case about a group of scammers targeting elderly homeowners, people tricked into signing fraudulent transfer contracts. One of the suspects was named Melissa Connors. Later, she got married and changed her last name to Hayes." My hands trembled. "Are you certain, Mrs. Hayes?" he said firmly. "I never forget faces like hers. They're charming, intelligent, perfectly rehearsed. They make their victims feel loved. And once the victims let their guard down, everything they own disappears." I swallowed hard. It was as if the ground beneath me had vanished. The thing I had feared most was now undeniable. "Can you help me?" I whispered. "I need proof. I need to know what she's done." There was the click of a lighter, then his voice again, measured, resolute. "If you're the prey, Mrs. Hayes, I used to hunt the predators." A chill ran through me. That sentence, quiet, sure, and edged with history, was both terrifying and comforting. The next day, I went to meet Samuel. He lived in a modest house on the outskirts of town, the walls lined with old case files and pinned maps. Samuel, gray-haired, tall, his eyes sharp as a blade, The air smelled of burnt paper and bitter coffee. On his desk, an old laptop glowed faintly, showing a list of names from past investigations. There it was, highlighted in pale blue, Melissa Connors, alias Hayes. I stood frozen, my breath caught in my throat. "Dear God," I whispered, "I brought a snake into my home." Samuel's gaze followed mine. "Now you see why you have to be careful," he said. "Tell no one, especially your son. If Melissa forged documents, there's a lot more she's hiding." Outside, the rain still fell soft and persistent. For the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. There was someone who understood someone who had faced monsters like her before. "What do we do next?" I asked quietly. Samuel lifted his cup of coffee, looked at me through the thin curl of steam, and said, "We show her that the prey can bite back." Our eyes met. Between two people scarred by deceit, there was a wordless understanding. I knew from that moment that Melissa's game had entered a new phase, and this time, I was no longer standing still. I came home from my meeting with Samuel, a different woman. No longer a victim trembling in confusion, no longer the mother who only knew how to endure. Inside me rose something sharp and cold, a quiet determination that burned hotter than fear. I knew I was facing someone clever, manipulative, dangerous. But this time I had a weapon, the truth, and Samuel Reed. We met again 3 days later at a small cafe near the harbor. Samuel carried an old canvas bag, inside it a few recording devices, and a tiny camera no bigger than my fingertip. "This isn't about technology," he said, setting them on the table. "It's a game of patience. She'll tell us everything herself if you make her feel safe enough." I stared at the gadgets, both frightened and fascinated. I'd never imagined I'd do something like this. "Are you sure this is legal?" I asked. Samuel's smile was faint, almost bitter. "She invaded your life first," he replied. "You're just taking back your right to the truth." That night, I hid the devices around the house, a recorder inside the flower vase on the dining table, another beneath the couch cushion, and the small camera tucked behind the picture frame of Daniel and Melissa's wedding photo. Everything was in place, perfect, invisible. The house I'd known all my life suddenly felt like a stranger, filled with secrets and whispers I could almost hear. Melissa showed up the next morning carrying a basket of fruit and that same sugary smile. "Mom, you look tired lately. You should rest more. Let me help clean up a bit, okay?" I nodded, pretending to be frail. "You're right, dear. I do feel tired. Go ahead, do whatever you need." She smiled, put the basket down, and walked straight into my office, so naturally it made my skin crawl. I stayed in the kitchen, holding my teacup tight, listening. The creak of drawers, the rustle of papers, her soft footsteps. The camera was rolling, and I knew Samuel was parked across the street watching the feed in real time. Later that afternoon, we sat in his car parked under the oak trees. He played back the recording. Melissa's voice came through, calm and deliberate, speaking on the phone. "No, you don't get it. She's starting to suspect. We have to move faster. If she dies sooner, we won't need to fake the papers anymore." The words hit me like a blade of ice. I froze, breath catching in my throat. My fingers dug into my palms until they ached. Samuel paused the audio, his eyes steady on mine. "You heard that?" Clearly, I nodded. Every word. He leaned back, thinking, "We'll need more proof, something she can't deny." "Do you really think she'll say more?" I asked. Samuel looked out the windshield, voice low and sure. "Predators like her always do. They can't stand silence. They need to brag about the hunt." I understood then. From that day, I began to play my role. I pretended to be weaker, forgetful, confused. I let Melissa believe that things were going her way again. I invited her to dinner, asked her advice, acted like I couldn't remember where I put my own documents. Slowly, she relaxed. She talked more, laughed more, her arrogance slipping through her smiles. I'll never forget one particular afternoon. She was sitting on my couch, speaking softly into her phone. "Don't worry," she said. "She's almost agreed. The house will be ours soon." I stood in the kitchen, heart pounding, listening to every poisonous word. Each sentence was a nail in the coffin she was building for herself. When she left, I called Samuel immediately. He arrived within minutes, that same calm expression on his face. "Good," he said quietly. "You're making her confident, and that's her biggest weakness." I looked at him, my voice trembling but firm. "I've lost my husband, my trust, and my son. I won't lose this house too." Samuel's gaze met mine, sharp and steady. "You're not alone, Victoria. Just keep playing your part. Leave the rest to me." That night, I stood before the mirror, studying the woman reflected there. The wrinkles on my face no longer looked like signs of aging. They were scars of survival. "If you're the prey," Samuel had told me, "then I'm the one who used to hunt predators." But as I looked into my own eyes, I realized something. I wasn't the prey anymore. I was the one setting the trap. In the stillness of that quiet house, the clock ticked softly. And in that fragile silence, I knew the silent game had truly begun. I knew the day would come when Daniel found out. Not because Melissa would tell him, but because people like her always knew when to push someone into the light. And it came sooner than I expected. That afternoon, I was in the backyard talking with Samuel. We were going over our next step. He had just discovered a few strange transactions linked to Melissa's account. The sunlight was fading, the air smelled of soil and roses. Everything seemed calm until I heard Daniel's voice at the gate. "What are you doing here, Mom?" I turned, my heart sinking as I saw my son standing there, suspicion burning in his eyes. Behind him, Melissa stood with her arms crossed, her expression caught somewhere between pity and triumph. "Son," I said softly, "I was just talking with Mr. Samuel, an old acquaintance of your father." Samuel nodded politely. "Nice to meet you, Daniel. I worked with your father years ago." But Daniel wasn't listening. He stared at me, his tone sharp, almost accusing. "You don't trust my wife, do you? Who's been filling your head with nonsense?" I froze. Hearing him speak like that, I knew Melissa's poison had already seeped deep. I tried to stay calm. "Daniel, I just want to understand what's going on." "There are things you don't know." "No, Mom," he interrupted. "I know you're being manipulated, and this man," he pointed at Samuel, "what right does he have to interfere in my family's affairs?" Samuel didn't flinch. His voice was low but steady. "I'm just helping your mother reclaim what's hers." Daniel's fist tightened, and Melissa stepped forward, her tone syrupy but sharp underneath. "Honey, your mom's just confused. I told you lately she's been forgetting things, maybe even signing papers she doesn't remember." She turned to me with a soft, venomous smile. "Mom, please, you need rest. Don't let people scare you for no reason." I met her eyes and said nothing. I'd learned that monsters didn't always shout. They often whispered sweetly while twisting the knife. "You'll understand," I told Daniel quietly, "but not today. One day, you'll see who's telling the truth and who's pretending." Daniel looked away. "I don't want to hear any more." Then he turned and walked off, Melissa's hand resting gently on his arm, guiding him away from me. I watched them go, my chest hollow. Samuel placed a hand on my shoulder. "Don't blame him," he said. "People only see what they want to see." I nodded weakly. "I just fear that when he finally sees, it'll already be too late." That night, the house felt emptier than ever. I sat at my desk, a blank sheet of paper before me. Richard's old fountain pen trembling in my hand. Slowly, the words began to flow like tears I hadn't let fall. Daniel, if you're reading this, everything has already happened. I'm not writing to blame you or to make you feel guilty. I just want you to understand that love doesn't always come with trust, and sometimes we trust the wrong people because we're afraid of being alone. I used to be that way. When you turned your back, it broke me, but I knew only the truth could bring you back. I don't need you to believe me now. I just need you to remember this. No matter what happens, I never stopped loving you, even when you thought I had. I stopped writing, watching, as a tear smeared the last few words. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer where Daniel often looked for documents. One day, when the truth finally surfaced, he'd find it, and maybe, just maybe, he'd understand. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows, the branches tapping lightly like fingers against glass. I closed my eyes and listened to it, a fragile rhythm, like my own heart breaking. I had lost my husband, and now my only son. Melissa had won a battle, yes, but only a battle. I would let her think she'd won it all, until the moment she realized she'd been playing my game all along. I rose, wiped the tears from my face, and lit a candle by the window. The flame flickered across Richard's photograph beside Daniel's. "You see this, don't you?" I whispered. "They think I'm weak, but they forget every weak mother has a limit." Outside, darkness swallowed the garden whole. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of storm clouds. And in that moment, I knew the real storm hadn't even begun. But when it came, I would be ready. Samuel's message arrived on a damp, heavy afternoon. On my phone screen, only a few words appeared. Transfer signing, tomorrow 9 a.m., Charles Law Office. I read it again and again, my heart tightening with each glance. So it was happening. Everything I had feared, suspected, dreaded, it was all real now. Samuel came shortly after. He carried his old leather bag worn from years of use. Inside it were strange tools, a sleek steel pen, small and unassuming, but inside was a hidden camera and thermal-sensitive ink. "You'll sign as they ask," he said quietly. "But every stroke of that pen will record the images, the voices, every word in that room. This pen will be the witness they never expect." I took it in my hand, my fingers trembling, the cold metal seeping into my bones. "What if they find out?" I asked. Samuel met my gaze, his eyes firm yet gentle. "You have nothing left to lose, Victoria. But if you do this right, you'll gain everything back." That night, the Savannah sky opened up with relentless rain. I sat alone in the living room, the pen glinting under the warm light. The house felt foreign, almost alive, watching. Every photo frame, every chair, every curtain seemed to hold its breath for what was coming. I reached out my fingers, tracing the cool steel of the pen. Signing. Such a simple act, yet this time it meant everything. It was no longer about ink on paper. It was the line between justice and deceit, between loss and survival. I closed my eyes and memories came flooding back. The day Daniel married Melissa 10 years ago. Sunlight streamed through stained glass, dancing on my trembling hands as I signed their marriage certificate. My hands had shaken then, too, but from joy. I thought I was signing the beginning of their happiness. Now, those same hands would sign to end the lies. My heart whispered, "The hand that once signed happiness will now sign justice." The wind howled outside. Rain lashed the windows like a warning. I stood and walked to the framed wedding photo on the wall. Daniel and Melissa, smiling, radiant, untouched by darkness. My fingertips brushed over my son's face. "Tomorrow," I murmured, "you'll understand what your mother has done for you." My phone buzzed. A message from Melissa. Mom, I'll pick you up tomorrow. Don't worry, I'll handle everything. We just need your signature. I stared at the words, that icy politeness, and smiled faintly. Yes, Melissa, I whispered. We'll sign, but not the way you think. Samuel called again. His voice, steady as ever, came through the line. I'll be nearby. When you sign, let them talk. The more they say, the stronger the case. Remember, justice needs timing, and tomorrow is yours. I'm ready, I told him. The night deepened into silence. Sleep refused to come. Every drop of rain outside was like a ticking clock, reminding me that this was my last chance, not just to reclaim a house, but to reclaim my dignity, my truth, my name. Near dawn, I wrote a few short lines and left them on the desk in case I didn't return. If anyone finds this, know that I wasn't afraid. I only did what was right. And whatever happens, I want my son to remember his mother did not stay silent. When the first light of morning broke through the window, I rose, adjusted my blouse, picked up the pen, small but heavier than anything I'd ever held. As I stepped outside, I no longer felt like the frail woman I'd been months ago. I was someone walking into battle, my own. Samuel was waiting in his car. He looked at me through the windshield and gave a slow nod. Ready? I met his eyes and said, my voice firm as steel, the storm is here, and I'll be the one who survives it. That morning, the sky over Savannah was unusually clear, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Sunlight glittered across the river's surface, but inside me, everything was still and cold as stone. Samuel's car stopped 1 block away from the law office of Charles Harper. He looked at me through the rearview mirror, his voice calm but firm. When you walk in, make them believe you've given up. The arrogant always talk the most when they think they've already won. I nodded, gripping the pen in my hand. It was small, almost weightless, yet it carried my fate and theirs. The building where the signing was to take place gleamed with sterile brightness. Melissa was already there, sitting at a long white-covered table, a thick stack of documents in front of her. Beside her was Charles Harper, her lawyer, a man in his 50s with gray hair and a polished smile that never reached his eyes. I knew what lay behind that smile, a carefully hidden network of greed and deceit. "Mom, Melissa!" exclaimed the moment she saw me. Her tone was syrupy sweet. "You made it! This won't take long, I promise." Charles stood and extended his hand. "Mrs. Hayes, so glad you could come. Everything's ready, just your signature and it's all done." I smiled faintly as I took a seat. All of this just to make things easier for Daniel, right? "Of course," Melissa cooed. "You'll finally be able to relax. No more stress about bills or repairs." I looked at her, my expression calm. Inside, every trace of fear had drained away, replaced by something hard and steady. I pulled out the pen and placed it on the table. "Let's sign." The room seemed to thicken with silence as I leaned forward. Every stroke of my hand on the paper felt like the toll of a bell. The pen gleamed faintly under the light, recording everything, every word, every sound. Melissa leaned toward Charles, whispering with a smirk, her words barely audible, but the pen caught them all. "See, I told you she wouldn't suspect a thing. We're about to have it all." Charles chuckled under his breath. Money always makes people weak, especially the elderly. I stopped writing and looked up at them, a slow smile touching my lips. "It's done," I said, sliding the papers across the table. "Now the house is yours, at least in your imagination." Melissa frowned in confusion, about to speak when the door burst open. A group of officers entered, badges gleaming. Leading them was Samuel, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. "Melissa Hayes," he said clearly, "you are under arrest for elder financial fraud." Melissa's face drained of color. Her eyes widened in horror. "What? No, no, this is a mistake. Mom, tell them you know me." Her voice cracked, trembling between fear and rage. I met her eyes emotionless. "I do know you," I said softly. "That's why I stayed silent." 2 officers moved in, handcuffing her as she struggled. "Charles, do something," she screamed. But Charles just sat frozen, his own face pale. Then one of the detectives stepped forward, dropping another folder onto the table. "Charles Harper," he said, "you're being investigated for orchestrating a statewide elder fraud operation." I turned to Samuel, stunned. "You said he only assisted her." Samuel nodded, his expression grim. "We've been tracking him for months. Melissa was just one part of his system. But thanks to you, we now have everything we need to shut it all down." Charles shot to his feet, voice rising in desperation. "You don't understand. We didn't force anyone. They signed willingly." Samuel's gaze hardened. "No, you didn't force them. You deceived them. You preyed on trust, and that's worse than theft." The room felt heavy with the smell of paper-cheap perfume and fear. My hands trembled slightly, but not from weakness this time. It was relief. As the door closed behind the officers, silence filled the space they left behind. I turned to Samuel. "Is it over?" He shook his head slowly. "No, it's just beginning. You've won your part, but now justice will take its course." I looked toward the window, sunlight streaming in through the glass. Melissa Charles, all the predators who once saw me as prey were now just shadows fading into the distance. I touched the pen still warm in my hand and whispered, "The hand that once signed for love has now signed for justice." Samuel placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "You've done what few could, Victoria. You faced the darkness and didn't look away." For the first time in months, I smiled, a real unguarded smile. Outside, the Savannah sky was impossibly clear, the river glittering like it had been washed clean. Judgment Day had come, and for once, I was not afraid of it. The trial ended in a heavy, suffocating silence. Sunlight streamed weakly through the courthouse windows, glinting off Melissa's pale face. She sat motionless, her once glossy hair disheveled, eyes hollow and tired. There was no trace of the confident, charming woman she used to be. Charles, in contrast, remained composed, though I noticed the faint tremor in his hand as the judge read the verdict. "Melissa Hayes and Charles Harper are hereby sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for fraud, forgery, and the organized exploitation of elderly property owners." The sound of the gavel striking echoed through the courtroom like thunder. I didn't flinch. My eyes stayed on Melissa, who looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, defeated, broken. As the bailiffs approached, she finally looked up. Our eyes met for a fleeting second. There was no hate left between us, no deceit, only the quiet recognition of what she had become. "I once called you my daughter," I said softly, "but you chose to betray the very hand that held you." She said nothing. Her lips quivered, but no sound came. The heavy door closed behind her with a metallic thud that seemed to seal not just the courtroom, but a chapter of my life. Samuel was standing near the back. When I turned, he gave me a small nod. "It's done, Victoria," he said quietly. "They won't hurt anyone again." I nodded back. "No, Samuel, they're not paying for what they did to me. They're paying for what they did to themselves. Justice doesn't need anyone to gloat." In the following weeks, the case spread across local newspapers. Letters began arriving at my doorstep, people I'd never met, mostly women, some widows, others living alone, all telling me how they too had been deceived, betrayed, and stripped of what they'd worked for their entire lives. As I read their words, I realized something important. I wasn't alone. There were countless others like me, mothers, wives, women forgotten by time, who trusted too deeply and were punished for it. I couldn't save them all, but maybe I could build something that would. So I used the restitution money along with what remained of my savings to establish a foundation called Harbor Home, a place where older women who'd been betrayed could find help, safety, and a new beginning. The day it opened, the sky over Savannah was impossibly blue. The sign Harbor Home gleamed on a wooden board above the small riverside house. A few women hugged me, their eyes wet. "Thank you," they said. I only smiled and replied, "No thank you for having the courage to stand back up." That night, when everyone left, I stayed alone in the quiet. The river shimmered under the setting sun, and in the stillness, I thought of Daniel. Since the trial, my son hadn't come to see me. He hadn't called either, but I understood. It's not easy to face the truth that the woman you loved most destroyed everything you believed in. He needed time. Then one evening, as I was tidying my desk, my phone lit up. A voicemail. His voice low, trembling, broken. "Mom, I heard your message. If you ever hear this, remember I still believe you were a good man. Mom, I'm sorry. I was blind. I let her turn me against you. You didn't deserve that. I don't know if you can forgive me, but I want to come home." I sat there, tears spilling silently down my cheeks. I didn't call back. I didn't need to. The message itself was enough. The next morning, Daniel showed up at my gate. He looked older, thinner, his face worn from guilt. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I walked to the gate and opened it. He stepped forward and hugged me tightly like a child again. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. I held him close, my voice steady and warm. "You don't need to be sorry. What matters is that you can see clearly now. You're still my son." We stood there under the soft morning light, the river breeze carrying the scent of magnolias. I could feel his heartbeat against mine, strong and alive. For the first time in years, the ache in my chest began to ease. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote a single line. "Justice is not about winning. It's about finding peace." Outside, the sound of waves brushed against the shore of Savannah, a quiet, rhythmic heartbeat of a woman who had walked through the storm and finally found her way home. That morning, Savannah glowed under a sky so clear it seemed to have been freshly painted. Sunlight sparkled on the river, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of salt and magnolia. In front of the small riverside building stood rows of wooden chairs neatly arranged. Dozens of elderly women, hair silver, faces kind but weathered, were gathered outside, murmuring softly among themselves. They had come not just out of curiosity, but because they were seeking something they thought they had lost hope. I stood at the top of the steps, a white silk scarf draped loosely around my shoulders. Behind me, the new wooden sign shone in the sunlight, Harbor Home, a safe place to begin again. Once this house had been an old riverfront villa. I bought and restored it with the restitution money from the court. The same money that had once symbolized my pain now became the foundation for something that would heal others. Friends, neighbors, local reporters, and several of the women who had written to me filled the courtyard. Samuel was there too, standing quietly near the back, his sharp eyes softened with pride. Daniel helped arrange the chairs, saying little, but every now and then he looked at me with a smile that reminded me of the boy he once was. When the ceremony began, I stepped up to the small wooden platform and took the microphone. My heart was calm, steady. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice gentle but clear. For a long time, I believed justice meant seeing the guilty punished. But I've learned that true justice isn't about who wins or loses. It's about being able to rise again without hatred in your heart. The crowd fell silent. The wind stirred the flags along the porch. Harbor Home, I continued, is more than a shelter. It's a harbor, a place for women who've been hurt, betrayed, or forgotten to reclaim themselves. Because sometimes what we need most isn't revenge. It's to be seen, to be heard, and to begin again. For a moment, I looked out over the river. The savannah shimmered under the noon light, winding away like a ribbon of glass. And in that stillness, memories rose like ghosts. The sound of breaking glass, Melissa's cold voice, Daniel's angry eyes, the long nights when I wondered if justice was even real. Now I knew the answer. After the ceremony, people came up to thank me, sharing fragments of their own stories. One small, frail woman took my hands in hers, eyes filled with quiet tears. "Victoria," she asked softly, "don't you hate them? After everything they did to you?" I looked into her eyes and smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile that hides pain. It was calm, genuine, whole. "No," I said gently, "I don't hate them. I just regret that I spent so many years trusting people who didn't deserve it." The woman nodded and pulled me into an embrace. I could feel her heart beating against mine, slow, fragile, but alive. It was the sound of healing. When the crowd dispersed, only Daniel, Samuel, and I remained. The three of us sat by the riverbank, the air filled with the scent of damp grass and salt water. Samuel spoke first, his voice low. "You did what most people can't, Victoria. You turned pain into light." I smiled, eyes fixed on the horizon. "No, Samuel, I just followed what my heart told me to do." Daniel was silent for a long time, then whispered, "I think Dad would be proud of you." I turned to him. His eyes were red, glistening. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Your father used to tell me that trust is the one thing no one can steal if you guard it with truth." The sun began to sink, casting long streaks of gold across the water. I rose and walked toward the wooden railing, the boards creaking softly under my feet. The river shimmered like liquid fire. The sound of the waves lapping against the shore was steady, comforting. I whispered, "People can take away property, money, even reputation, but they can't steal the soul of a mother." Behind me, Daniel laid a hand on my shoulder, the gesture saying everything words could not. Samuel drifted away quietly, leaving me with the peace of the evening, the murmur of waves, the cry of distant gulls, and the soft hum of a world finally righting itself. I closed my eyes and let the wind run through my hair. The light was warm on my face, soft and forgiving. After years of storms, the air finally smelled like calm. From the house behind me, a piano began to play Clair de Lune, faint and trembling, its notes blending with the rhythm of the tide. I smiled, letting the melody wash through me. The sun sank lower, melting into the river, and the world glowed in shades of amber and gold. Harbor Home stood strong in that golden hour, a quiet monument to resilience. I knew that tomorrow more women would come, carrying their pain, their shame, their stories. And they would leave with something simple but precious, the belief that no matter how dark life becomes, light will always find its way back. And there, bathed in the soft glow of evening, I stood listening to the waves of Savannah, where every loss had turned into peace and justice wore the face of compassion.